Now, the 38th governor of the state of Minnesota, Governor Jesse "the Body" Ventura.
Hi, how are you doing today?
Well, Governor, what have you been up to since you've left office? You've got a book that's out in paperback now. Tell us a little bit about that, too.
Well, it still rings true, and I got to go back and review. We spend how much money on Viagra? $40 million on Viagra? Are you kidding me? Whom are we supplying that to? The generals and admirals? When I was in the Navy, guess what? I was in my 20s. I hate to say this to you, but I didn't need no Viagra. I didn't need no Viagra when I was in there. I didn't have that problem at all. When I went to Subic Bay in the Philippines, where you got 250 bars and 10,000 girls every night, Jesse didn't need no Viagra. Who the hell is taking all this Viagra? Unbelievable that the government is spending $40 million on Viagra? Our military's in more trouble than I thought. If it takes $40 million of Viagra to keep them going, my day we didn't need no Viagra. I hate to say it, but anyway, this is business now for a moment, if we may. Military spending's out of whack. We spend more than the other 23 countries in the world combined on military. You know where Russia ranks? Fourth. They're not even second. They're fourth. We're number one. We spend more. So when people sit back and say, who's really the aggressor throughout the world? Look at who's spending the money on war. The United States. And I think we need to change something. You know, in the old days, it was called the Department of War. And they didn't like that name, so they switched it to the Department of Defense. Well, I got news for you. We need to go back to the Department of War, because what the United States is doing today, they're not defending themselves. They're the aggressors. We have the most powerful, well-equipped military in the world right now. Nobody can challenge us. Are you kidding? We are the best. You hearing that out there? I'm not criticizing the warriors. They're the best. But I'm criticizing is our politicians who are financing all this. Because why do we need, when we've got people up in Flint, Michigan that can't even get clean drinking water to drink, and we're building new aircraft carriers for billions of dollars and all this stuff, like we don't have enough? And what is this fear they keep giving us? Someone's going to invade us? What, ISIS is going to do a Normandy landing in Virginia? And we're going to have to defend ourselves? They always claim all this money to defend America from who? Who out there, I'm asking you, who out there is trying to take over America? Because it's not the Russians. Putin's got enough trouble in Russia. It's not anybody out there trying to take us over, and yet we're made to believe there's these people waiting right around the corner to come in here and change our way of life. My question is, who the hell could do that? And they couldn't do it right now against our military. Why do we need a military budget of over $824 billion? Are you kidding me? For what? To conduct these wars halfway around the world that accomplish nothing? Korea accomplished nothing. Vietnam accomplished nothing. Iraq accomplished nothing. Afghanistan has accomplished nothing. Syria is accomplishing nothing. All of these wars we've been involved in accomplish nothing. Because when you've got a very hungry thing that must be fed on a daily basis, food gets expensive. What is the budget of that contingency deal you talked about? The one that actually pays for the wars. And how many wars are we actually in now? You know, here's something that's been in my craw a while, and it's a little off the subject. When I was off the grid last year, I come back and I found out that Donald Trump had pumped 59 missiles into Syria. Right, Brigitte?
Yep.
59 missiles into Syria. And I sat back and I thought, wait a minute. When did we give the president the ability to go to war without Congress approving it? And shooting 59 missiles into a country, isn't that an act of war? So it violated our very Constitution. Where were our elected officials? They were cheering this. The country of America cheered when we pumped 59 missiles into Syria, allegedly because of chemical warfare. We now give the president where he can, at his own whim, like maybe next year, pull out Iceland, and we can fire some missiles in there if they do something? Or what does this exactly mean? I'm confused, because in my day, according to the Constitution, the Congress had to declare war before you could pump 59 missiles into a country purposes, right? I've never met a missile or seen one that doesn't kill people. How is that humanitarian? Something that I've known. We are the biggest arms dealer in the world.
And we actually are, yes.
Yeah, we pump out all the arms that eventually can shoot our own guys. Can be used against us if something happens and if the roles switch around. Can be used against us. I find that very interesting. Then, when our government comes at us and tells me that I should give up my guns, I should give up my Second Amendment guns, it's the right thing to do. Well, I've already gone on the record and said, I'll consider giving up my guns and the Second Amendment when I see the United States of America stop being the biggest arms dealer in the world. When we quit selling weapons throughout the world, then I'll give due consideration to giving mine up locally. But until my government shows me that they're for peace and they're not going to build and sell weapons for people to kill each other throughout the world, how dare them? How dare the liberals, too, come at me and tell me to give up my weapons when they're signing off on everything that there is? Anthony Diggs joins me now live from Los Angeles to talk more about the military. Anthony is a veteran who served in Iraq. He's also the CEO of Veteran Stand, an organization helping veterans transition from military to civilian life. Welcome aboard, Anthony.
Thank you for having me. I'm very grateful for being here.
Well, Anthony, now the military, you know, I served way back from 69 to 74. I'm a Vietnam veteran. And the military always finds money for new weapons, like lately this fancy new aircraft carrier they've just built and named it after Gerald Ford. And I really find that ironic that they can spend money on an aircraft carrier and for Gerald Ford, and yet Flint, Michigan doesn't even have clean drinking water where Gerald Ford came from. They got poisoned water, but yet they'll build a new carrier. Why is it that the government can afford all the stuff for weapons, but yet fall short when it comes to supporting people like you and me when we're done serving in a veteran capacity?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think any one of us would be really hard-pressed to find somebody who has served in the U.S. military and seen combat that would disagree with the idea that money is essentially being wasted on war. Not that war is a waste of money, which could be argued until the cows come home, I understand, but that money is being wasted on war. And, you know, we could look at it from two angles. On the macro, we've spent nearly $2 trillion on a war on terrorism over the last 15 years. That hasn't done much to reduce terror or empower or provide strategic advantage to anybody who is living under terrorism. And yeah, it's dealt a good blow to our economy over here, where we have serious infrastructural issues in the United States that we're not addressing. We're told that we don't have the funds to address, like you mentioned, what's happening in Flint, Michigan.
You know, Anthony, what I find remarkable, I'm a little older than you. I've circled the sun 66 times now. You know, I've gone around the sun. That's how I call my age now, how many times I've circled the sun. And, you know, if you keep your eyes and ears open, and in my 66 years, I'm post-World War II. I was born about the time, 51, when Korea. But every war in my lifetime has accomplished nothing. Every war in my lifetime that I've seen, from Vietnam to Iraq to all of the war on terror, is accomplishing nothing. And we're channeling all these resources and funds down a cesspool. When is this country going to wake up and understand that war is not the answer?
Yeah, it's a big issue. And, when we normally talk about the cost of war, we're saying, 850 billion spent in Iraq, 720 something billion spent in Afghanistan. But we don't always consider, future costs and obligations that we are going to need to deal with, like veteran disability, veteran healthcare. Like even if we were to stop our involvement in every military campaign that we are actively participating in right now, we would still have 50 and 60 years ahead of us of veteran disability and mental and physical health care for the youngest of the people who are serving today. So I'm not quite sure what it will take, to end war, but maybe if some of this money that we are investing into these wars were to be invested into infrastructure at home, education at home, community programs, maybe we'll find ourselves one day with a population of people who are saying, enough is enough. Yeah. We need to invest in things that are constructive.
Anthony, now the military's wasted $28 million over the last decade buying new forest camouflage uniforms for Afghan soldiers. Now, the problem I see is there's not a forest in Afghanistan. Why would they spend $28 million? Now, listen, hear me out on this. Or are they preparing for the next one? And this is the sneaky way of doing it, because these camouflage sounds like something that would belong to me in Southeast Asia, in the jungles, not over $8 million for forest colors. Is there a forest in Afghanistan?
Yeah, that's kind of silly. And, whether it is being, purchased ahead of time for something that may be planned down the road, or if it's just a part of what the military industrial complex essentially is, which takes taxpayers' dollars, filters them through the war on terror or whatever war, and then delivers those dollars to the banks of people with special and private interests.
Anthony, you're an Iraq veteran. Do you sit here today and can you tell me the Iraq war was a success?
The Iraq war was absolutely not a success. And just like it would be hard to find a veteran who would disagree with the idea that money has been wasted on wars and is being wasted on wars, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a veteran of the Iraq war or even the Afghanistan war that would say these campaigns were successful and that people across the globe are better off because of them.
You know what else too, Anthony? I watch the news and they talk about Russian aggression now. The aggression of Russia. That's why we have to bring these sanctions against them and all that. How come it's never brought up about United States aggression? We invaded Iraq, who did nothing to us. They had nothing to do with 9/11, and I, as a civilian, thought that was the reason we were going to war, was 9/11. Iraq had nothing to do with it. We invade the country, we occupy it, we overturn its government, and that's not called aggression? Our announcers and talking heads back here don't list that as aggression?
Oh, yeah, that's just another issue of us really having to, when we're trying to figure out and solve these issues that are happening all over the world, we have to look back at ourselves and say, how are we contributing to these things that are happening in negative ways? And, are we being slightly hypocritical here when we are accusing other nations of being brutal and inhumane in the ways that they deal with their own people when, we have a pretty comprehensive history of having done that ourselves.
We're winding down here now. I want to hear, though, Veterans Stand, what are you guys working on right now? Let's talk about your organization. I know you're up in the Dakotas, stopping the pipeline. Way to go. What's Veterans Stand working on now?
Right now, what we are working on, so in December, we organized the mobilization of more than 2,500 veteran servicemen and women to answer the call of the Standing Rock Sioux. We got there within days. The Army Corps of Engineers denied the easement for the pipeline to go through. And, there was a victory to be celebrated at that point, but we understood that that was not the end of the battle. halfway through January, Donald Trump's first executive memo was to essentially expedite that, override any need for an environmental assessment. And we went back out there, and we were there in February when the National Guard and several law enforcement agencies were sent in to remove the last of the unarmed, peaceful, indigenous people and water protectors who had gathered there. But what we're doing now is, through that time, through our involvement in Standing Rock with 2,500 veteran servicemen and women together, it was a reminder to me of the immense issue that we have in the United States of dealing with veteran health care. And it really catalyzed what our next project is going to be, which
Anthony,
is to... Yes.
Let me interrupt a second. That's a thing that bothers me. I watch TV today and I see like the Wounded Warrior Fund and all of this stuff out there that hopefully is doing good. But what irks me is that here they are coming to the private sector again, asking us to support the veterans financially. Shouldn't it be the government doing that and not private funds? After all, it was the government that sent you to war. I didn't.
Absolutely. The VA healthcare system is notoriously understaffed, overcrowded, and there is a huge issue within it of the overprescription of some pretty hardcore pharmaceuticals. When I left the Marine Corps, I was given 7 prescriptions to deal with traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress, and the symptoms related to that. And it wasn't until I was taking those pharmaceuticals that I ever even considered, the idea of self-harm. And thank the heavens, I have friends who tough times and helped me distance myself from those medications and find alternatives that would, the issue was, I go to a psychologist to say, hey, I'm not feeling well, and I'm prescribed a medication that doesn't allow me to feel at all. And that's not a solution. Healing is not something that can be achieved through a pharmaceutical. So, our next mission is to, because of all of that, to highlight the awareness or to raise awareness on how medicinal cannabis can be used to treat the symptoms related to post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. Yes?
We're running out of time. I want to take time to thank you. Thank you on behalf of all veterans for the job that you're doing out there.
I'm not terribly optimistic, but I always have hope. And seeing how many trillions of dollars they stand to profit off of this pipeline running, I know it's going to be an issue long into the future. Yep. So got to stay active and stay vigilant.
It's people like Anthony that make us veterans proud. People that come home after the fact and pick up the gauntlet like he is. This guy is phenomenal. And I don't have a hat on, but if I could, I'd tip it to him right now. The government sends these people off to war, and when they come home, they're basically abandoned. And then it's up to people like Anthony, people like all of us, to chip in and support these veterans when it should be done by the government who sent them to war. We didn't do that. The government did. First of all, you've got big pharma. You've got the liquor industry, the tobacco industry, and the status quo that even though we live in a capitalist society, they don't want the competition. So you deal with that, first and foremost. Second, and most of all, the biggest problem is this. Our government doesn't want you to get anything free. I mean nothing. If they could meter the air you breathe, they would find a way to tax you for it. Here, in my opinion, is the big rub on the major thing why cannabis is not made legal. Because poor people could get it for free. You wouldn't have to necessarily pay the government to get it, and it wouldn't necessarily, even though it would be a highly profitable industry, technically speaking, you could grow it in your backyard. When I was growing up in South Minneapolis, in the city, every summer my mom would churn up about a third of our small little backyard, and she would grow tomatoes. We would have fresh tomatoes all summer. You could do the same thing with cannabis. You could plant the seeds, grow your cannabis, you and your neighbors could use it, and guess what? You wouldn't be paying the government a penny. You wouldn't be paying taxes. And you wouldn't probably have to use all the big pharma products. You could eliminate some of those. The big rub is the fact if they fully legalize, you could get cannabis essentially free if you wanted. But people aren't going to do that, though, just like liquor. Right. Okay, with alcohol right now, you can make your own beer, you can make your own wine, but who's going to go to all that trouble when you can go to the store and get it? I knew there was another thing behind the scenes that was causing the NFL to do this, but this is phenomenal. Yeah. Because if the NFL, the National Football League, puts their stamp on the cannabis, trust me, that's more powerful than the Congress and Donald Trump combined in the eyes of Americans. What can possibly beat football? That is the biggest thing that happens. And now the NFL, as you said, the NFL owners are meeting with the Players Association to take possibly cannabis or marijuana off the restricted drug list, which means players would be able to use it for their pain, for their head injuries. Now we just have to convince Donald Trump and Jeff Sessions that military people need it too, because it's tremendous for post-traumatic stress. And you guys claim to be patriots and support the military, then why are you torturing our soldiers and not letting them get the cannabis medicine they need? Well, you know, they always they've tried prohibition on, with the opiates, I think it's simply addiction. It is so powerfully addictive. You could go in the hospital, you could have a surgery, they put you on this stuff, and you end up getting hooked. Because all of a sudden, you're taking these opiates, and opiates are highly addictive, where cannabis is not physically addictive at all. Now, you can be psychologically addicted to it. In fact, that simply means you like it. You enjoy it. The same as you would having a beer or a glass of wine. But an opiate is a physical addiction. If you don't believe me, bring in Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones. He can verify what it's like. Oh, I think the blame game comes from the world of pharma. Pharma has a rubber stamp. They can put anything out there, no matter how detrimental it is to people's health, and they get rubber stamped through. Because if you look at television today, on mainstream TV, 70% of the ads are pharmaceutical. They control the media. Pharma controls the media. And so that's why the battle with pharma is so intense, because they're not held accountable for anything. I think it's refreshing in a way, but again, Jeff Sessions isn't getting to the root of the problem. The problem is, why are they being prescribed? What is causing people to use these heavy-duty narcotics, highly addictive, and jeopardizing their own lives? Simply trying to prohibit things does not work. When is government going to understand that? It's the definition of insanity. When you do the thing over and over and over again, expecting a different result, that's the basic definition of insanity. That's what the drug war is insanity. We need to find the root cause. Why are the people in pain? And why would they need powerful drugs like this to control that pain? Or is it that they get addicted and they're really not in pain? I don't trust, after what I went through, I don't trust our judicial system. You can take people to court all you want, you can win in front of juries, but you got political hack judges at the Court of Appeals who will overturn it. And they overturn it based on money, power, you know, and all this. So Big Pharma, even though all this court action could take place, they'll be able to protect themselves at a higher federal level where they deal with judges who are in for life. See, these judges live in glass towers at the appeal level. They can rule any way they want. You can't take them out of being judges. They're there for life. So see, that's all part of the bigger picture of what you're dealing with here. And so Big Pharma ain't done with the fight. Don't think for 1 minute they're surrendering. They will come at it legally from the standpoint, I think, at the appeals level, and you'll see whatever is won at the lower level will magically get overturned at the appeals level. I hope so. We're going down the road, but I always say at the end of the show, be vigilant. The cannabis people, be vigilant. Don't take nothing for granted. You've got to keep working as hard as you have to this point. Work twice as hard to do the right thing. But they're with the NFL and the move that they made, that is massive if it comes to reality. Because like I said, the NFL truly governs America. This didn't raise a flag decades ago? Amazing. Truly amazing. That is astounding.
Yeah, it's
that
a
they
huge
write
problem.
that many prescriptions and people are worried about, and they outlaw cannabis, a natural plant that grows. Some things are called common sense, which we seem to have a great lack of in the official end of our country, common sense. $45 billion, and look at this, when they talk about jobs, let's take Colorado for a moment. 18,000 new jobs, 2.4 billion added to Colorado's economy. It's jobs, people, it's work. How many people work in the tobacco industry? How many people work in the alcohol industry? You have the same waiting to work in the cannabis industry, and it's much better than alcohol and tobacco. I welcome Jen Hobbs, co-author of Jesse Ventura's Marijuana Manifesto. Jen is also a co-producer of this show. She joins me live to talk about the lead crisis and hemp. Jen, first of all, this is new news to me, really and truly. How does cannabis clean up lead?
Well, it's interesting that it's news to most people, but this is something that we've known for many years, dating back to the 80s. Hemp is the type of plant that absorbs toxins from the soil. So in other words, plants in general, doesn't matter really what you're growing, they absorb all sorts of things from the soil. So that's why farmers have to rotate their crops. Hemp is unique in that it is the type of plant that only absorbs toxins such as heavy metals like lead, radiation even, and arsenic. So this is something that could be planted in a contaminated area and then the soil would become uncontaminated.
Okay, now, let's say they use cannabis or hemp to do this. They put it into the area that's poisoned or whatever's in there, and it absorbs all that. Mm-hmm. Okay, what do you then do with the contaminated hemp? Now, the hemp's all loaded up with all this bad stuff.
Right.
How do you dispose of the hemp?
It's a great question. So there's actually two different ways to do that. Normally when hemp absorbs anything from the soil, it goes into the seeds. That's primarily where it winds up. So if you're looking to get rid of that primary source, you can actually use this process called hydrochloric acid to leak that part of that chemical out, or it can actually be safely turned into biofuel.
Really?
Yeah.
So we can drive vehicles with it. Mm-hmm. I believe Willie Nelson does that, if I'm not mistaken, that Willie runs all his buses on biodiesel fuel from hemp. And then when you look at it, too, one of the great things about doing the book that you and I did together was the education. Mm-hmm. And I think people need to know this education. They need to know a few things like that. Hemp was the economic driving force of this country for its first 150 years. Right. That we were actually ordered as the colonies to produce it by the British so that they could use it to make sails and rope and colonize the world with their navy. Mm-hmm. And here's the part that really, really, truly gets to me, is that if you could magically fast forward from yesterday to today, if Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, the father of our country, were alive today, they'd be doing 10 to 12 years in the federal prison for being a major narcotics dealer.
Oh, yeah.
Because our forefathers, that was their prime crop. Definitely. Because we go back to the history, we find out William Randolph Hearst had thousands of acres of timberland. He didn't want hemp or to be used, which makes better paper. Look at the Bill of Rights and the Constitution if you need an example. So the way to eliminate it, pay off the politician in Washington, get them to make it illegal, and That's what Hearst did way back in the 30s. And I think, wasn't he also money behind Reefer Madness?
I believe he supported it.
I heard that he had financially, that there, maybe we're right, maybe we're wrong, but certainly it was at that time they came out with this, what you call asinine propaganda film that is so ridiculous. It's crazy. Brigitte, you look like you're chomping at the bit.
All right, Jen, what about the Industrial Hemp Farming Act of 2017?
It's a great question, Brigitte. That's a brand new bill that is being presented right now in Congress. And what they're trying to do, Governor, is they're trying to get hemp removed from the Controlled Substance Act.
Which it should be.
Exactly.
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 I mean, people need to understand, you could smoke a ton of hemp and you're not going to get high.
Yeah.
If you're looking for, you know, the euphoric feeling, the THC feeling from cannabis, it's not going to come from hemp.
Right, right. But here's the weird part, though, about this bill. So they're going to try and take it off the controlled substance list. Right now, it's a Schedule I narcotic, which is the same as heroin. And the idea behind it is, okay, everyone will be able to grow it federally. Okay, so they don't have to go through a special academic program or petition the DEA in order to get access to the hemp. However, what is also in the bill that is a bit hypocritical is they're going to allow the DEA to come to your property and inspect it at any time. To make sure
at any time
to make sure
that you're only growing hemp.
Right.
You know, what a waste of resources. And what will that cost us to do that?
Right, exactly.
You know, again, I'm going to go back. The National Football League is getting ready to take it off the list, America. The National Football League is going to let their players use it for pain so they don't have to get hooked on opiates. Do we need any more convincing? If it's good enough for the NFL, that's better than the president, Congress, and the Supreme Court okaying it in this country, because more people put more credit to the NFL than they do those three government institutions, I think. So the thing to me is that this is huge. We need to keep the focus on it, and the education has to continue to take place when you got the lying of the government telling you that hemp somehow should be classified with heroin.
Right.
I mean, that is a blatant lie.
Right.
It is a complete lie, and our government has no problem. Always remember, the government lies to you.
Jen, I also want to know about the lead to prison pipeline.
Okay, so what they've discovered now, since they're putting together all these pieces about what is the long-term effect of lead poisoning. Of lead poisoning. Right, because there are so many more communities now that are being affected by it across America. So what researchers have discovered is that the irreversible effects of lead is really, it really takes place in a child's brain. So we're seeing huge drops in IQ levels to someone who gets too much lead in their body. We see people that wind up with this certain area of their brain being affected that handles reasoning, that handles knowing the consequences of your actions.
Could this be a prelude to erratic behavior amongst young people? If young people are behaving a little erratic, could it be that it isn't their fault that they have lead in them?
Right.
And that we haven't done the proper thing with lead and it's getting into people? Because this is all permanent damage, right?
Oh, yeah, there's no way.
And this retards the brain at a young age to where you probably, I'm guessing, can't catch up.
Right.
Once it's happened to you, once you've gotten the lead poisoning into your system, there's nothing available right now that...
There's no cure.
No cure that could bring you back to a normal level.
Right.
So in this country, we're more worried about stopping hemp, which will stop lead, than we are lead itself.
Right, right. And
let me finish. You know, when I was governor of Minnesota, there was lead at the governor's mansion. It's an old building. I had to sign a special thing for them to come in and get the lead. So it isn't just the kids who are affected. The head of your government could be if they're in an old lead-infested building.
Right. It affects...
Is that what did this to me, Jen? Can I blame my behavior today on lead? Can we do that?
Also, it's
anything I do wrong from now on, anything Jesse the Body does wrong, tack it up to lead. There was lead in the governor's residence in Minnesota. That's what did it all, Jen. I got an excuse now.
Governor, I want to know your final thoughts specifically. I have done some reporting in California covering the lead poisoning issue, and a lot of these families have no idea that there is even lead in their water and that their children are being affected by it, and the communities are supposed to raise money at the district level or at the state level to simply repaint a house. There has been zero conversation about using lead to decontaminate. And what happens to this decontaminated lead once it's done being used?
And I got that beat. When I was governor of Minnesota, the governor's residence had lead in the water. We had to do my commissioner of health had to do a special appropriation for them to come over to the governor's mansion, which is an old building, and it's not updated because they determined there was lead in the water in the very house that the governor and his family live in. And I think it even predated me, Jen. They didn't put it in just because I was the independent. It got there before I got there. It was there before I got there. But that shows the level. When it's actually in the governor's residence of Minnesota, the lead content is too high and all of that. Knowing how our Congress works, I think someone will beat us to the punch. Yeah, I think that Mexico could do it. Canada, it's due in Canada next year, full legalization. I think full legalization, we're at least 2 years away from it, minimum, nationally, because I don't see these people, our Congress and our senators, being that on top of anything. They have all these other important issues to deal with, like, the crap they deal with that affects nobody. Absolutely, because there's money made in the war on drugs. There's profit being made continuing the war on drugs. That's why it needs to be ended, for the money reasons. I don't think they will be able to ruin it because marijuana was here before Big Pharma, and it's too embedded locally. Big Pharma will get a grip. You'll have Budweiser, but you'll still have a lot of craft beers out there that you'll be able to access. You can take the Budweiser if you need to, but there'll be plenty of options for you not to buy the Budweiser. And I use Budweiser only as the example. Officials, they were cheering this. The country of America cheered when we pumped 59 missiles into Syria, allegedly because of chemical warfare. We now give the president where he can, at his own whim, like maybe next year, pull out Iceland, and we can fire some missiles in there if they do something? Or what does this exactly mean? I'm confused, because in my day, according to the Constitution, the Congress had to declare war before you could pump 59 missiles into a country purposes, right? I've never met a missile or seen one that doesn't kill people. How is that humanitarian? Something that I've known. We are the biggest arms dealer in the world.
And we actually are, yes.
Yeah, we pump out all the arms that eventually can shoot our own guys. Can be used against us if something happens and the roles switch around. Can be used against us. I find that very interesting. Then, when our government comes at us and tells me that I should give up my guns, I should give up my Second Amendment guns, it's the right thing to do. Well, I've already gone on the record and said.
Now the 38th governor of the state of Minnesota, Governor Jesse the Body Ventura.
Hi, how are you doing today?
Well, Governor, what have you been up to since you've left office? You've got a book that's out in paperback now. Tell us a little bit about that, too.
Well, it still rings true, and I got to go back and review. We spend how much money on Viagra? $40 million on Viagra? Are you kidding me? Whom are we supplying that to? The generals and admirals? When I was in the Navy, guess what? I was in my 20s. I hate to say this to you, but I didn't need no Viagra. I didn't need no Viagra when I was in there. I didn't have that problem at all. When I went to Subic Bay in the Philippines, where you got 250 bars and 10,000 girls every night, Jesse didn't need no Viagra. Who the hell is taking all this Viagra? Unbelievable that the government is spending $40 million on Viagra? Our military's in more trouble than I thought if it takes $40 million of Viagra to keep them going. My day we doing all this. Because why do we need, when we've got people up in Flint, Michigan that can't even get clean drinking water to drink, and we're building new aircraft carriers for billions of dollars and all this stuff, like we don't have enough? And what is this fear they keep giving us? Someone's going to invade us? What, ISIS is going to do a Normandy landing in Virginia and we're going to have to defend ourselves? They always claim all this money to defend America from who? Who out there, I'm asking you, who out there is trying to take over America? Because it's not the Russians. Putin's got enough trouble in Russia. It's not anybody out there trying to take us over, and yet we're made to believe there's these people waiting right around the corner to come in here and change our way of life. My question is, who the hell could do that? And they couldn't do it right now against our military. Why do we need a military budget of over $824 billion? Are you kidding me? For what? To conduct these wars halfway? Didn't need no Viagra. I hate to say it, but anyway, this is business now for a moment, if we may. Military spending's out of whack. We spend more than the other 23 countries in the world combined on military. You know where Russia ranks? Fourth. They're not even second. They're fourth. We're number one. We spend more. So when people sit back and say, who's really the aggressor throughout the world? Look at who's spending the money on war. The United States. And I think we need to change something. You know, in the old days, it was called the Department of War. And they didn't like that name, so they switched it to the Department of Defense. Well, I got news for you. We need to go back to the Department of War, because what the United States is doing today, they're not defending themselves. They're the aggressors. We have the most powerful, well-equipped military in the world right now. Nobody can challenge us. Are you kidding? We are the best. You hearing that out there? I'm not criticizing the warriors. They're the best. But I'm criticizing is our politicians who are financed around the world that accomplish nothing. Korea accomplished nothing. Vietnam accomplished nothing. Iraq accomplished nothing. Afghanistan has accomplished nothing. Syria is accomplishing nothing. All of these wars we've been involved in accomplish nothing. Because when you've got a very hungry thing that must be fed on a daily basis, food gets expensive. What is the budget of that contingency deal you talked about? The one that actually pays for the wars. And how many wars are we actually in now? You know, here's something that's been in my craw a while, and it's a little off the subject. When I was off the grid last year, I come back and I found out that Donald Trump had pumped 59 missiles into Syria. Right, Brigitte?
Yep.
59 missiles into Syria. And I sat back and I thought, wait a minute. When did we give the president the ability to go to war without Congress approving it? And shooting 59 missiles into a country, isn't that an act of war? So it violated our very Constitution. Where were our elected